What does it really mean to be a professional photographer today? It is no longer simply a question of owning professional equipment or even creating beautiful photographs. It's about building a sustainable business, continuing to evolve through enormous technical change, finding community in what can be a very solitary profession, and remembering why the work matters in the first place. In this episode, I'm joined by Angela Kurkian, CEO of the Professional Photographers of America, for a conversation about the profession of photography, where it has been, where it is going, and what photographers need in order to build careers that are both meaningful and sustainable. Welcome to In Focus with Ken Clough Photography, a podcast about wedding photography, storytelling, and creating meaningful images together. I'm your host, Ken Clough, a wedding photographer based in New York's capital region. Many of the episodes on this podcast explore photography from the perspective of couples and the people we photograph. But today, we're turning the camera around and looking at the profession itself. My guest is Angela Kurkian, CEO of the Professional Photographers of America, an organization that has been serving photographers for more than 150 years. Angela's own journey began behind the camera and eventually led from operating a photography studio to helping lead one of the most important professional organizations in our industry. Our conversation explores what it means to be a professional photographer, the challenge of creating a sustainable business, the challenges brought by digital photography and artificial intelligence, the importance of professional community, and why photography continues to matter. So, let's take a listen to my conversation with Angela. I'm here today with Angela Kurkian from the Professional Photographers of America. And we can't wait to hear about her story and what her interest and passion for photography, how it developed into leading one of the premier organizations of photography in the world. So, Angela, welcome. We're so happy you're here.
Oh, thank you so much, Ken. I'm excited. I'm excited for this conversation.
Why don't you start by telling our listeners a little bit about your story, your journey as a photographer, and how that kind of led you to PPA?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Well, maybe it's just interesting to me. But I've only ever been a professional photographer in my all growing up. So I worked at a country club at the University of Florida in Gainesville, and the same couple photographed weddings there every single weekend. And they were kind enough to adopt me, and I ended up learning a great deal from them. I started going to photography conferences when I was 18, coming to Imaging USA at a very young age, and absolutely fell in love with the people of photography. And honestly, and I'm not that person who says, I've had a camera in my hand since I was 6. I'm kind of the opposite. I fell in love with the people, and I thought, well, I can figure out photography if I can at least be in this industry. I love this industry so much. I love the people of this industry so much. And so I really kind of fell into it backwards in that way. So yeah, people first, and then the art and the craft. And of course, I fell head over heels for the art and craft as well. So.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm kind of the opposite way. I was one of those people that had a camera when they were 16 and just had to go out and photograph everything. Yeah, I know you had a studio at one point as well.
I did.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So starting in this, I was fortunate, honestly, because my mentors, Susan and Stuart Powers, they actually were educators as well. So they taught all around the country and really supported photographers as they were running businesses. And so when I decided to make this a profession, I really had strong shoulders to stand on, and started my business in Cincinnati, Ohio, just outside of Cincinnati in a little town called Milford, but started in weddings in 1994. So medium format, Bronica, big film. Again, I think the weddings always appealed to me because I love people so much, and I love love. And so really got into it that way. And then ultimately built a studio with 5 photographers on staff. It was a really fantastic experience. I did that for about 25 years.
Wow, that's a lot of weddings to photograph.
Yeah, I think I estimated once somewhere between 700 and 800 in
Oh,
my
wow.
career. Yeah.
Wow, that's quite an accomplishment in and of itself. Notwithstanding, joining the Professional Photographers of America and then becoming the president. Can you how did that journey happen?
Sure. It's, it's crazy because I think sometimes you just look at your life from this vantage point. I turned 55 this year, right? So I've been doing this a minute, but I started really early. So somehow I feel like that makes me feel better about my age. I started with PPA. Obviously, I've been coming to imaging, and I've been a member since 1994. And so, knowing all the people and being involved that way. But I actually got involved on the association side when I started as a consultant for what we had then at the time was called Studio Management Services. And as a photographer, I was a consultant to help other business owners learn how to kind of up level their business. And so on staff, they had an accountant who worked with them directly on that side of it. And then I would work with them more on the marketing and the sales side of it. And so fell in love with that. And then I ended up moving to Atlanta. I married, I married my husband, and moved to Atlanta. And he actually worked at PPA for a very long time. Scott was the CFO here for 33 years. Just through a series of things, they asked me to come in as a consultant on staff to help develop their education program. They were in a space where they had amazing volunteers and committee members helping to craft and to try to build this education platform. But they really needed someone full time on staff to get it off the ground. And so I originally just came in just to do that. I was just going to work for a year and just help them get that started. And then after I'd been here a year, they said, well, this seems to be working. Do you think you might want to stay on? Scott and I talked about it, thought, yeah, actually, I really am enjoying this. And I love supporting photographers and I love helping photographers really understand and own their value as business owners and as creatives. And that is still at the heart of everything that I teach. So then I was the director of education for 13 years.
Defining success. Angela's story reflects something that is true for many photographers. We may enter the profession because we love creating images, but eventually we all have to decide what kind of life and business we are trying to build. That means defining success in practical terms, not simply by the number of sessions or weddings we photograph, but by the income we need, the hours we want to work, the time we want with our families, and the value of the experience we provide. In this next part of the conversation, Angela discusses why photographers must understand the business behind their creativity if they want their work to become truly sustainable. I do a lot of mentoring of younger photographers myself. One of the things that people are always surprised by is the business aspect of photography. Everyone gets very excited about the creative side and wants to take pictures. And then they kind of hit a brick wall sometimes when they get into the how do I do this as a business kind of
Yeah.
thing. I know you've been very involved, with the studio management services and, how do you help professional photographers understand the business side and really be successful in that? Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges I see with a lot of younger photographers.
You are not wrong, Ken. That is truly between imposter syndrome and then just honestly, most colleges don't teach the business this way, right? And so I hear this a lot. The first thing I always ask when I'm teaching is, "What's your definition of success? What do you imagine your life to be?" What I love about photography as a business is that you can design it to be anything you want and to support any lifestyle you want. You just have to figure out what that is, right? So asking yourself questions like, how much money do I need to make a year? How much money do I want to make a year? How many vacations do I want to take? How many days a week do I want to work? I had to make the decision as a wedding photographer that I was going to give up my Saturdays, right? That's a choice. That's a
Mm-hmm.
lifestyle choice. And so really look closely at the life that you want to build. And then that will start to help you create the business that you want. I teach a class to college students, and it's like the 5 things I wish I knew before I started my business. Because there was a period of time I worked like crazy, like the first 7 years of my business. And I never knew when enough was enough. Like that was always like when's enough enough? I don't know. And then when I figured it out, when I actually sat in a class with Ann Monteith years ago, I remember having this feeling of, oh my gosh, why did nobody ever tell me this? I wish I knew this before. And it's things like there's actually an algebraic equation that you can use to figure out your pricing. Like
Hmm.
you don't pull it out of thin air. You can actually, based on how much you want to make, how many hours you want to work, how much you want to make per hour, there are equations that you can use to objectively look at your pricing and price appropriately for what it is that you're creating, instead of just trying to figure out, well, what's the guy down the street charging, or I don't know, people say they'll pay this amount, so I'll just try this. Yeah, there's actually just there's good benchmarks for all of this, and PPA is an amazing resource. All of our For our members, they have access to all of our benchmark studies that we've been doing since 2003, and so you start to understand what is my cost of sales percentage. What are my overhead expenses? How much should I be profiting? What do those benchmarks say, and how do I get there? So having a roadmap, I think, is really important. There's a business guide on ppa.com. I think that right now it's open to non-members, if I'm not mistaken. Sometimes we open it up. So if you go in and you search business guide, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact URL for it, but I think that's available to people, and that's really a step-by-step process on how to build your business.
Yeah, a while ago, I participated in one of the PPA business member sessions. I forget what it was called
Yeah,
at the time,
yeah,
but it was kind of a weekly thing where you sat down and you just talked about how to, what all the aspects go into running a photography business. And I found that very useful because when I was starting out in photography, kind of like what you said, you look around and like, what are other people charging? Well, if I charge less, I'll get more customers, but then it's how does that relate to what I really want to earn, or how does it relate to how I want to run my business? And I know one of the things I do now when I mentor photographers is I'll bring out, my expense sheet and show them, here's what I pay for rent. Here's what I pay for insurance. Here's what I pay for internet. Here's what I pay for my website. And
yeah.
it's all these expenses that people really don't, think about when they first
Mhm.
start out in the business. They're like, I got a camera, I got a couple of batteries and a lens or two. I'm just going to go shoot everything.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you can do that and just work yourself to death and really
Mhm.
not make any money.
That's the truth. And I think of things also in seasons, because people always want an answer. What is right and what is wrong?
Hmm.
And I do think it often depends on the season that you're in. But here's what I will always say: we talk a lot about profitability, but we also talk a lot about sustainability. And so, one of my biggest pieces of advice as people are getting started is, don't start at the bottom. Don't start at the lowest that you can charge because you're afraid to charge more. Definitely do your math, do the homework. Because here's the thing: you start to build a clientele at that lower price point, and now you're killing yourself. You're not making that much money. So, you decide you want to raise your prices. Well, now you raise your prices, but now you have to build a whole new clientele,
Hmm.
right? Because this clientele that you've trained only values you to this point. So now you need to train the next level of clientele to value at this higher level. Well, then what happens when that's not enough, right? And then so instead of going through all those iterations, and yeah, we do the math ahead of time. We figure out what that value is, and then you learn how to give the client the value that they're paying for, which is not just a piece of paper. It's not just a file, right?
Right.
It
Right.
is the entire experience of working with you. And so that's going to lead us down a whole conversation of what it means to show up as a professional.
What makes someone a professional? Photography has become more accessible than at any point in its history. Almost everyone now carries a capable camera, and images are created and shared constantly. But access to a camera is not the same as being a professional photographer. Professionalism includes technical ability, but it also includes preparation, consistency, responsibility, communication, business practices, and the ability to deliver for someone when the moment cannot be repeated. So, how should we define the word professional in today's photography industry. Let's take a listen. One of the things that I hear a lot from young photographers is, well, I'm a professional photographer. I charge money. And it's like, well, there's a little bit more to it than that. Would you like to talk about that? What does a professional photographer mean from your perspective?
Yeah, it's so interesting because there's lots of definitions for this. And I'm not going to say that I'm going to answer this completely and wholly because somebody will get on me and be like, but it's also this. But I love it as a thoughtful exercise. I do think that being professional is also about how you show up, right? It's how you treat your customer. It's every interaction that you have. It's what you wear, it's the brand that you build, it's the messaging that you have, how people experience your business, right? And of course, it's also all of the paperwork and, setting it up appropriately and the tax status and, all of those things and paying your taxes and all of that. But I guess I would say that being professional is also a state of mind. It's the way you think about your business, right? So showing up, the way that you think about your business, the thing that it will then dictate how you show up and the things that you do for your customers. It's one of those tricky questions because everybody has a very strong opinion in some cases about what it means to be professional, but I think it really does start with mindset.
I think you're right. I mean, that's one of the things I write about a lot is that the experience that you provide a couple, it's not just showing up on the day of the wedding and taking their photographs. It's taking the time to understand them, making them feel comfortable in front of the camera, at least from my perspective. Again, I think you're
Yeah,
so right that there are so many different ways to look at professionalism. You talked a little bit about market segmentation in terms of price. I think there's market segmentation in terms of the experience that each photographer delivers to their customer. And that doesn't mean one is right or one is wrong. It just means that they're different and different people look for different things when they go out and hire a photographer.
absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of like Gregory Daniel. When he teaches, he just kind of likens it to, are you McDonald's, are you Applebee's, or are you a fine French restaurant?
Mhm.
Right? And all three of them have appropriate spaces, right? When you're hungry, you want something fast. Yep, Mickey D's will do, right? And you chart, and the prices are different, right? And so I think it really gets into, again, how do you want to serve your customer, and what's your business model?
And I think the other thing photographers sometimes don't realize when they're starting out is you're going to change, and that's okay. You may start out at the McDonald's level in your example and end up at the French restaurant, and that's
Absolutely.
perfectly fine as you grow and progress through your own career and what you come to like and how you want to interact with people.
100%, 100%. I think seasons, right? And we
Hmm.
learn and we grow. I mean, that's the joy of this.
I know it's sometimes scary. I go back and look at my first wedding I ever photographed, and I'm like, wow, that's okay, but it's not what I'm doing right now. But it got me to where I am today.
Absolutely. But I bet your customers from those first days love their images just as much as your customers love them today
They
because it
did,
works, right?
and they do, and I still hear from them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because it was the relationship that I built with them. It wasn't just I gave them here's your files, or
Yes,
here's your album kind of thing.
I love it.
Photography through technological change. Photography has always evolved alongside technology. The transition from film to digital transformed how photographers worked, how quickly images could be produced, and how clients experienced photography. Smartphones and social media changed it again by making photography part of everyday communication. Artificial intelligence may represent an even broader change, not only for photographers, but for the very way society understands images, creativity, authorship, and truth. Let's listen as Angela and I discuss what photographers can learn from earlier periods of change and how we might respond to the changes happening now. I bet you've seen a lot of changes in photography over the years that you've been involved in it. Can you talk a little bit about some of the changes you've experienced and how that relates to the profession of photography?
Yeah, it's so interesting because photography is an art form, but it's also technical, right? It's a trade if you think of it. I mean, we PPA, Professional Photographers of America, is a trade association. And so when we go back in history and we think of it that way, it really kind of puts it into perspective of just how much we rely on technology and the changes that happen. And so, like for me personally, I started with, photographing weddings, medium format cameras, right? 2.25 film. And so going through that digital transition for us was not small. But it was a big learning curve. And I remember at the time people were like, "Oh, this digital thing, it'll pass. Film will always exist. We'll always have film." And we do. We still have film, and people still love it. And it is now, it's actually now become kind of the elevated experience in a lot of ways, right? Which is really fun to see. But if you were a photographer in those times, you had to make some decisions about how you wanted to adopt and adapt, right? What does that look like for my business? And it completely changed our workflows. And I went from photographing 300 images at a wedding to 3,000 because it was so much fun and you could just take so many photographs and it didn't cost you any money. Or it was like $1 a shot, $1 a shot every time you took the photograph. And so that drastically changed our workflow because now all of a sudden we're sitting hours behind our computers where that didn't exist before. Right? So just a lot of and then we had to learn how to, not be so excited about every photograph that we could possibly take and, settle ourselves back down a little bit.
I know I've been through that arc myself where I went from taking so many photos to like, why am I doing that? I'm just going to take what I need. And
Yeah.
I think I end up with some better photographs that way.
It's, what I think with film, we were in some ways, and people who are going to disagree with me, I don't mean to be offensive to anyone. It's not meant that way. It's just when you only can take 300 photographs, you're really mindful about every single image.
Mm-hmm.
So there is this, we're metering the light to make sure it's right. Like everything you're watching, you learn, you train yourself to look for blinks. So you're always looking over your camera, you focus and then you manually focus, that is, it's on a tripod and you're watching for so that you're just trained differently, than how things are today. And that's wonderful and fantastic. And we love technology. And oh my gosh, when I got my Sony camera and this like I just was in total love with the images that were coming out of it because everything was beautiful color and tack sharp and all the things. So we love technology, not stuck in the past, but you also have to be aware that there's evolution and changes and things to adapt to, and we're going through that now. We're going through that now with AI. And so it's an interesting conversation. People are always like, well, what is PPA's stance on AI? And stance to me assumes that there's this judgment about it, that you have to stand somewhere. And what I find with AI is that it depends on what area of AI we're talking about. Are we talking about the part of AI that scraped the internet and stole from millions of photographers? And we're talking to congressmen and senators in Washington, D.C., I'm going to have a certain stance on AI, right? But when we're talking about the efficiencies that can be created and making photographers able to spend more time doing the thing that actually makes them money, which is being behind the camera, then AI is fantastic, right? So it's just like anything else, like any other new technology, there's going to be big shifts. This one in particular, I think, and not unlike digital, but probably more extreme, is it's a societal shift. So we're facing not just what's affecting our industry, but this really is a societal shift in how we're using technology and how we view creativity, how we view photography, and how we view, if I get philosophical, how we view what's real. One of the things we say in DC all the time is we don't want to wake up in a world where creatives are not incentivized to create, right? We don't want that. And so there's a human component to this as well that we're talking about and exploring.
When you were talking about the transition from film to digital, what kind of was going through my head is there's really different elements to the creative process now. You've got the in-camera process, creative process that you have to do. When you talk about composition and lighting, you've got the post-production creative process, and different people are drawn to different parts of those. And I would even throw AI in as a third different creative process, notwithstanding all the discussions of some of the bad things that you just talked about. but it's like it opens up a new creative window for some artists to really express themselves in a different way.
Absolutely.
Like I know photographers, like I just shoot in camera and that's it. There are lots of great photographers who spend a lot of time in post-production modifying their image, and they come up with some of the most spectacular images I've ever seen. I couldn't do that.
Yeah,
And I know there's going to be AI artists that are going to take it to the next level. And
absolutely.
so it's really, what are you comfortable with as an artist and what do you want to create is kind
Yeah,
of how I look at it.
absolutely. Yeah. And different pockets are kind of affected differently. I don't think that most people are going to want to put an AI image of their family on their wall because there's something about that feels kind of weird about that, right? Like I would look like I don't know, making things up, or it doesn't feel authentic. Or, I mean, we're so, I feel like our natural human tendency is honesty. We want truth, right? And so there's that. But I will also say, because we do a lot of work with ASMP, the American Society of Media Photographers, and NPPA, which is the National Press Photographers Association, and they face very different issues with AI. The NPPA is facing it is about truth. It is about what is the public seeing and experiencing, and is it honest, right? Because we know all about the deep fakes and all of that stuff. So it's spread across a big continuum, and that's why when I say it's a societal change, it's big and it affects every one of us in a variety of ways.
The need for community. Many photographers work independently. We may spend our days running a studio, photographing assignments, editing images, communicating with clients, and trying to make countless business decisions largely on our own. That independence can be rewarding, but it can also become isolating. Professional community gives photographers a place to learn from one another, talk honestly about their challenges, find mentors and peers, and recognize that many of the problems they face are not theirs alone. In this section, Angela explains why connection and community remain the central work of PPA and why photographers need one another, perhaps now more than ever. Let's switch gears for a little bit. I know there's a lot of photographers out there that kind of work independently. They get a camera, they're editing alone, they're running their business alone. It's kind of like a one person kind of operation. How does PPA fit into that? What can that do for that independent, working alone photographer that's out there?
Sure. Well, now you're speaking to my heart, Ken, because I think that this is one of the most important things. I feel like you ask me what time it is, and I tell you how to make a watch. So I apologize if some of my conversations or my stories get a little bit longer, but if you, a lot of this is just really important to my heart, and I think community is vital to us as humans, and especially as small business owners. In 2023, Dr. Vivek Murthy, he was our U.S. Surgeon General at the time, he put out an advisory on the biggest pandemic in the world right now that's affecting us. And that pandemic is loneliness. And so when I couple all the, we start looking at the rise of depression and anxiety. And, I was listening to a podcast the other day with Simon Sinek and Trevor Noah, and they were talking about this as well. And it was like, what the remedy is: friendship. And to me, that is the heart of PPA. That community is quite literally the heart of PPA. My entire life, my entire, I won't say my entire friendship base, but a big portion of it is based around photography because, like attracts like, and we love to talk to people who like the same things we like. And, when you're running a small business, it can be very lonely, and finding your people is a really, really important step in that. I was part of a mastermind group for 8 years, and my business grew way bigger than I ever imagined possible because of a group of people around me who helped me see a different way of doing things. And yeah, so I think anytime you can put yourself into a community of people who can support you, who can uplift you, who can help you get where you want to go, because that's the other piece of this that I think is really important. It's not just about listening to people who are already where you are. It's about meeting people who are or have been where you want to go. And that's what PPA gives people, is an opportunity to learn from people who've already made all the mistakes, people who've already walked the path, people who can help you just tweak one small thing that will launch you into the next level. So yeah, it's friendship.
No, I think that's a great answer. And I think all that's true. One of the other things that I found in meeting with other photographers is the diversity of ideas and
Mm,
thoughts that I experience with them. When I get together with other photographers and we talk about what we do, everybody does it differently. And that doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just, you learn different ways of looking at the same thing, and that can open you up to different creative processes, or even different business processes that they use that you can emulate. And so it's just a good way to kind of not only make friendships in photography, but you learn just how different every artist really is.
absolutely, absolutely. I love being around people who are learners. That's actually one of my. I read a lot. I read a lot, and so I'm always intrigued by people who are always learning things, because I feel like they're more interesting. They're always like, "Have you learned this? Or have you seen this? Or I just read this." Like I eat that stuff up. So I'm with you.
The future of PPA and why photography matters. PPA has served photographers for more than 150 years through changes in equipment, technology, business models, and culture. The challenge for an organization with that kind of history is not simply preserving its legacy, but it is carrying its purpose forward while continuing to respond to the needs of a new generation of photographers. Our final part of the conversation looks toward that future, but it also moves beyond organizations and technology to something more fundamental. Why photography matters, why the work is inherently relational, and why even experienced photographers should never take the privilege of doing it for granted. PPA has been around for a long time, maybe 150 years, I think. Um,
158.
158, wow. That's a little bit longer than I've been around. Uh, where, as the CEO now, where are you taking it? Where do you want it to go?
We're in an interesting and really fun phase right now, and season. So a couple years ago, we went to our board of directors and we had an idea for creating a lot more content and for telling better stories, more sophisticated, and just more fun, And the board was excited, and they were all in, and they funded this initiative. And so we started making content. And as we started to get into it, we realized what impact we could have. And so that was the beginning of what is now PhotoVision. And so PhotoVision, I always think of it as like Netflix for photographers. It's curated, it's trusted. These are all vetted photographers who run great businesses, have the experience behind them educationally to be able to teach. So it's not like going to YouTube where you have to wonder, and kind of dig through a bunch of stuff. Yeah. So this platform, we launched this platform last year, and now I think as we are developing some new systems and processes here at PPA, we really think of ourselves as always our sweet association. Like we are always that 100%. If we can add up to more than 100%, I would say the other part of us is the media company. So we think of ourselves now as a media company. We're storytellers. We are our own influencer in that, if that makes sense. We believe that we have an opportunity to unify the industry, that we are kind of uniquely positioned to be able to do that because we don't really have any competitors, right? Like there's nobody else who's been around as long as us, who is as trusted a resource, because we are a nonprofit, right? And so we can stand in the space and actually unify everyone who is for professional photography. So that's the place that we're stepping into, and it's incredible. It's exciting. It's big. it's better stories, it's engaging more people, it's helping more niche photographers than ever. Yeah, it's still in progress. Like we're still building it out, but I would say, you know, telling bigger and better stories.
Well, I think that's so appropriate. One of the things that I also write about is, photography is storytelling. A lot of photographers try and tell stories. Every photo tells a story. A series of photos can tell a story. Podcasting is a different way I can tell stories. So I think, we're built in storytellers as humans, and we want to be able to share our experiences with other people. So I
Yeah.
think that's really great to have that ability to share other information. I know some photographers, I asked them, where do you learn what you do? And like, I just go to YouTube. It's like, okay, that works. I know when I do it, I got to sort through probably about 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 videos before I find something that is really appropriate to what I want. So I think your approach of having a curated library where people can go and, look at things that are going to work can be much more helpful than just kind of hanging out and surfing the internet on YouTube.
That's what we're looking forward to. It's at this point we have gosh, almost 3,000 pieces of content on there.
Wow.
It's a lot.
Everybody go look at the PPA photo vision section right now.
Not right now because we're still talking. After this
Right
podcast,
after the podcast, you
go
can go
do
look.
that.
Back in my higher education days, I used to be part of a couple different professional organizations. And it seemed to get harder and harder to get people to join professional organizations for a whole lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Time, money. Why should people think about PPA as an organization to join?
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that. So I just watched I guess it's been about a year and a half ago. I watched a documentary called Join or Die. And it's a have you seen this,
No, I have
Ken?
not.
It's so good. It's a documentary that's over 50 years of research of how people connect in community settings. So the whole thing was kind of started around bowling leagues, right? So bowling leagues were a really big thing, right, in the 1940s and 50s. And then when TVs came along and became more prevalent in people's homes, bowling leagues started to die away because people were more interested in sitting at home watching their televisions than in meeting in community spaces. They also studied things like the number of picnics that the average family had a week. So they would have, 3 or 4 prior to television, and then post television, picnics started to die away. And so it's really a fascinating documentary for those who are interested in this kind of thing. And so looking at that and kind of, I mean, anything like look at any group, but at the end it does get very hopeful because I think there is a resurgence and a what once was a lack of appreciation for how important community is. I think that is starting to build and come back, and how we connect and how we gather. So I would say for me, number one thing is going to be community and relationship. That's probably the biggest reason that I think you should join PPA. Most people would say for the insurance, right? Because we give $15,000 of equipment insurance with your membership, and so that's kind of a nice thing. But I think it's about how we show up and what experiences we can have together, and the different people that you can meet when you're part of a much larger group like PPA than you could probably meet in your own area, in your own town, on your own, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
someone outside of your own area might be a little more willing to share all their secrets than someone that you're going to be a competitor with in your own space. And so there's a little bit of that, I think that plays into it. And I would also say that I'm not a big competitor person. Like I've always openly shared with all of my competitors. So I believe in cooperation over competition and a rising tide and all of that. And then also community networks. We have community networks all over the country. And so finding a small group of people to be a part of is also can be really helpful to your business.
No, I think that's right. I have the same kind of attitude. I've always shared what I've done. Even though photography can be a very competitive business, it's so diverse. Everybody does something different. You're not really competing with people. You're all vying for different slices of a different kind of market segment. What I found most useful is you kind of get in this mindset sometimes, I think, as a photographer, where you have to be behind your camera all the time. If you're going to improve your craft, you got to go out and take more pictures. Sometimes you just have to get out from behind the camera and go talk to some other people and
True.
find out what they're doing. So I found it was a good way to refresh by conversation or meeting people or listening to people, or just being part of a group.
I love that.
Is there anything that you would like to share about photography that we haven't talked about yet today, as you think about all your photography experience and all the great things that you've talked about today? Are there any parting words you want to give to either experienced or newer photographers that are just kind of learning the trade and the craft?
One of the things I've been working on lately, I write a lot just because I like to write. And one of the things I kind of had a realization about recently as we are crafting some of our messaging for, as we're working with our lobbyist in DC. And I talked to you a little bit about, we don't want to wake up in a world where creators aren't incentivized to create. And as I was thinking through some of that stuff, one of the realizations I made was that photography is inherently relational, right? Like when you're photographing sometimes another person. So there's that relationship. And not very often, I'm sure someone can give an example where this isn't true, but not very often are you photographing an image that no one else is supposed to see. Generally, you're photographing to share an idea, to share a feeling, to share a message, to share a relationship, to show someone who they are through the eyes of someone who loves them or through an artist's eyes who can see them objectively. And so I think I just want photographers to know how much I adore what they do, how courageous I think photographers are for choosing this as a profession. Because it's inherently relational, I think photographers can be very vulnerable and giving, and the gift that they give the world is pretty remarkable, and it's something we don't talk enough about. I would say just really encouraged. I'm encouraged by the photographers that I see doing the work every single day, and I admire them a great deal.
Those are some great words, Angela. Thank you. The last frame. What stayed with me most from this conversation was the idea that photography is fundamentally relational. The cameras will continue to change. The technology will continue to change. The ways we market, deliver, and even create images will continue to evolve. But meaningful photography still begins when another person trusts us enough to step in front of our camera. That trust brings both opportunity and responsibility. Being a professional photographer means knowing how to create an image, but it also means knowing how to build a sustainable business, how to care for the people we photograph, how to continue learning, and how to remain connected to a larger professional community. I also appreciated Angela's reminder that experience should never become indifference. Even after years behind the camera, those butterflies before an important assignment can be a sign that we still understand the significance of what we have been asked to do. Special thanks to Angela Kurkian for sharing her journey, her leadership experience, and her thoughts about the future of photography. Thank you for joining me for this episode of In Focus with Ken Clough Photography. To learn more about the Professional Photographers of America and their education, advocacy, community, and resources it provides for photographers, visit PPA's website at ppa.com. You can find additional episodes of In Focus with Ken Clough Photography, wedding planning resources, recent photography stories, and more information about my work at kencloughphotography.com. You can also explore my book, Creating Meaningful Wedding Images Together, which looks more deeply at the relationship between couples and their photographer and the process of creating photographs that reflect not only how a wedding day looked, but how it felt. I'm Ken Clough, and this has been In Focus with Ken Clough Photography. Until next time, stay curious, keep creating, and never lose sight of the people and stories that make photography matter.